Good afternoon, everybody. My name is Elsie Scott. I am the director of the Ronald Walters Leadership and Public Policy Center at Howard University. But more importantly, I'm a proud student of Dr. Jewel Lamont Prestage, and one of what we call Jewel's Jewels. And so I'm very happy that I was asked to moderate this panel this afternoon. And this panel is sort of an, I guess it was originally in one form or another, it was originally broadcast somewhat with the opening of the Jewel Prestige Center. And so it was so good until we wanted to have it replayed at NCOBPS because many of us were not able to participate at the opening of the Jewel Prestige Center. So we want everybody to know that there is a Jewel Prestige Center at Southern University. And we hope that you will be affiliated with us, that you will contribute to it and be a part of the legacy that Jewel Prestige left. And so we're very pleased. We have three outstanding panelists here with us today. And we may be joined by a fourth panelist, but she's tied up in another meeting. And so we're hoping that she'll be able to join us. But our first presenter will be Dr. Albert Samuels, who is a professor of the Jewel and James Prestige Endowed Professor of Political Science at Southern University. He holds a bachelor's degree in political science and an MA in social sciences, both from Southern University. And his PhD is from LSU, Louisiana State University. He's taught political science at Southern University since 1999 and currently serves as the chair of the Department of Political Science and Geography. His research interests include American politics, Black politics, Louisiana politics, educational policy, and voting rights. He's authored numerous publications. And he'll be talking with you about the attacks on voting rights and the big lie. I'll introduce all the panelists before he starts. But let me just say that I'm not camera shy, and I had done my hair today, but my camera's not working on my computer, so therefore you don't see my face on the camera today. Okay, our second speaker will be Dr. Stephanie Williams. Dr. Williams is a political scientist who specializes in American conservatism from massive resistance in the 1950s to the Trump era. Her research includes the Southern strategy, Reaganism, radicalized rhetoric related to the social safety net of Democratic and Republican presidents, starting from 1964, and the authoritarian actions of the Senate Republican caucus under the leadership of Senator McConnell. She earned her PhD in government from the University of South Florida, her MA from George Washington University, and her undergraduate degree from Spelman College. And she'll be talking about Mitch McConnell and the tyranny of the US Senate. And our final speaker, our third speaker, will be Dr. Charisse Nelson. Dr. Charisse Nelson is an assistant professor at Southern University. She directs the Jewel Lamont Prestige Public Policy Polling and Research Center. She's an executive board member of the Center for Racial Justice at Dillard University and the executive director for the Black Leadership Roundtable. She earned her PhD in political science from HU, from Howard University, her MPA at the University of District of Columbia, and she earned 2 bachelor's degrees in history and English from Stillman College in Tuscaloosa, Alabama. And she'll be talking about how is Black citizenship uniquely tied into voting rights, which can be compared to voting rights to other minority groups in America. So that's our panel, and we'll start with Dr. Samuels.
Thank you, Dr. Scott, for your introduction and for agreeing to chair this panel. And I think that just very quickly, many of us have been inspired by the courage that has been displayed by the people of Ukraine in recent weeks, as they have really struggled mightily to protect their democracy against a Russian invasion. So Americans the world over, and Americans and people all the world over have been trying to figure out how can we help in this struggle, and that's important. But what I like to talk about is that there's a crisis of democracy that's a whole lot closer to home. You know, the American penchant for portraying itself or projecting itself as the paragon of democratic virtue around the world reminds me of the biblical directive of physician, heal thyself. And as we think about what happened January 6, 2021, and if you didn't know any better, you know, if you saw those images, you might have thought that was Latin America, where this was happening, or some other capital in Africa or in Asia, not in the United States, where you have literally an insurrection, an attack on the United States Capitol by people who believed a lie that the election had been stolen, and that they were willing to use force, literally force, to try to reverse the results of an election that did not go in their favor. And we are learning more and more just about how close this came to succeeding. And while we rightly focus on January 6th, we are rightly doing an investigation about this, and it is right to expect, though we're still waiting to see this going to happen, if the people who engineered this will ultimately be held accountable for their actions. What I'd like to focus on just for a brief second here, it's not January 6th per se as the insurrection that almost destroyed democracy. I want to draw attention to this number, and that is 42,918. 42,918. Okay, that's the total vote margin when you combine the vote margin of between Trump and Biden in Georgia, Arizona, and Wisconsin. So it has been stated falsely, incorrectly, that the 2020 election was not as close as the 2016 election. That is actually false. 42,918 votes stood between us and authoritarianism. You know, as Stephen Levitsky and the Ziblatt talk about, that oftentimes authoritarianism oftentimes comes through supposedly democratic elections. And we came that close to Donald Trump actually winning again. If those 3 states went for Donald Trump, we would have a tie in the Electoral College of 269 to 269, which would have put the election into the House of Representatives according to the Constitution. And according to the Constitution, members of Congress vote by state delegations. Republicans have more majorities in state delegations than Democrats do, even though numerically, Democrats hold a slight numerical advantage. So what would have happened is that Donald Trump would have been elected president. He would have been an elected president of the United States, even though 81 million people, the most in history, he would have lost the presidency by the largest popular margin in history, and still won and still somehow not even win the electoral college, but actually through the House of Representatives. That's how close we came to authoritarianism. And I mean, just imagine what Donald Trump would have done with a second term. Just imagine what he would have done with a second term. Now, he didn't get that, but however, the lie that the election was stolen has now metastasized. It's metastasized into this excuse, this pretext that we're seeing all over the country, where 19 states have enacted laws, 34 in all, that have either made it harder to vote, that have either made it easier to intimidate voters, or easier to manipulate the results of elections once they take place. In other words, we can win even if we lose. You know, our state of Georgia is the classic example of that. We can talk more about that in just a second. But it could have been worse, actually. Pennsylvania, Michigan, Wisconsin, their legislatures also passed voter suppression bills as well. However, fortunately, they had Democratic governors who were able to veto them. However, we're in election year, and all three of those states are having elections. And so if the Democrats lose those three states, given the current climate, we would expect that those Republican governors would sign some of those bills that the Democratic governors vetoed. Michigan right now is trying to do an end run around the Democratic governor with some kind of initiative process to try to enact through that process what they could not get accomplished through the legislature. So that's the moment that we're in, and it's easy to think of this as an unprecedented moment. But this sort of looks like the politics of the 19th century to me. This looks like Reconstruction and the reaction against Reconstruction, and things like that. And that the Southern Redeemers who insisted that they had to reclaim control of state governments because they were so corrupt and they were run by the ignorant Negroes. And so in the name of good government, we must disenfranchise African Americans. This was also, you know, in the context of the Gilded Age, you know, with the power of monopoly capitalism, and it was also quite corrupt. And it was also about disenfranchising those people who were considered to be ignorant. But in this case, it was oftentimes of the North. It was immigrants. It was Catholic immigrants. It was about labor. It was the fear of giving working people too much power. And it seems like to me that we're having the same conversation. You know, we're talking about this same. It's the same thing is happening. And so to me, that suggests to me that this is a pattern, that America has a reactionary tradition, that the whole notion of American exceptionalism, that we don't have an ancient regime, that we don't have a reactionary tradition, it's just simply false. And so this is a pattern of American history that we're experiencing. And so I think that looking more closely at the politics of the 19th century tells us that we have been here before. And what it also tells us is that this is scary, how scary this moment really is. I'm gonna stop real quick, but I'm gonna make one quick point here. We think about the compromise of 1877, as this watershed moment. But in actuality, that's not quite correct, because Blacks still, despite climates of violence and a lot of things, still voted in significant numbers throughout the 1880s, and even in some places into the 1890s. So it didn't all happen at once. However, in the late 1880s, you have a Republican Congress, you have Benjamin Harrison, who gets elected president, close election. He actually lost the popular vote, won electoral college, but he had very narrow majorities between Republicans and Democrats. They attempted to pass a federal voting rights bill at that time to deal with some of the issues of voter suppression and things that were happening in the South. It failed. Passed in the House, didn't pass in the Senate. Democrats then proceeded to have significant electoral gains in the midterm election, and the National Republican Party abandoned the effort. Benjamin Harrison was a one-term president, and we know what happened next. My fear is that history may be repeating itself, because while the Republicans are in the process of just trying to destroy democracy in the states, Congress literally has the power to do something about it. But we had two Democratic senators who seem to be more concerned about the filibuster than democracy. So at this point, the federal government has been unwilling to pass a federal civil rights bill. And the Democrats right now stand poised to lose control of the Congress. And so my fear is that as bad as things look now, it can get a whole lot worse. And on that cheerful note, I will stop.
Thank you for leaving us on a quote cheerful note. And we'll turn it over to our next speaker, Dr. Stephanie Williams.
Okay, I am trying to turn on my presentation. If I don't get it, I'm going to, let's see. Is my screen showing at all? Okay. Well, I will talk through my presentation, and I can upload it in the chat when I'm finished. So it's a very similar discussion to what Dr. Samuels was talking about, because of what my discussion on Mitch McConnell. I think that he gets away with a lot of his behavior, because it's nobody really wants to talk about him. He's very dry, and he gets a pass as being a curmudgeon. And so, very few academics want to sit with Mitch McConnell. I mean, there's no academic biographies. He has his own autobiography. He had a friend write an authorized biography, and there was a minor book by a Kentucky journalist. But when Obama was in the White House, people were like, well, why can't Obama just get along with Mitch McConnell? And Mitch McConnell isn't someone who he makes friends. And it's my contention that the disdain that he was treated with, the president showed an extreme lack of respect for the office, and really, I felt, transferred a lot of racial animus to McConnell. So, McConnell is really an important historical figure. He is more than an obstructionist. He's played a long game of massive resistance in the Senate. And as he has ascended to the Senate in his 11th year as a Republican leader, he's carefully constructed a caucus of massive resistance. He has supported extremists to come into the Senate, and he doesn't just lead the Senate, he uses absolute power. And so there is really little, if any, dissent that comes out of the Senate, as we've seen even moderates seem to fold in the past couple of years. People like Lisa Murkowski or Susan Collins, who prior to McConnell's leadership had more voice of moderation, and now they've basically completely stopped. And so, you know, we really need to look at his record as basically a tyrannical leader, almost, if not really, that's calling him what he is. His obstruction is more than hyperpartisanship. It's been extremely destructive to the well-being of Black and Brown people in America. His narrative on race, he abuses the fact that he says that he was at the 1964 signing of the Civil Rights Bill, and he was at the March on Washington, and he voted to impose sanctions on South Africa in the 1980s. But in the 1990s, he has consistently been calling voting rights and efforts to impose voting rights fraudulent. He's broken regular order on many times to oppose the judicial nominations that could have helped in the current court cases to protect voting rights. And he has allowed extremist candidates to fill the seats that have been vacated by former moderate Republicans or Democrats. So what we really need to look at him in 2021 and 2022 as the leader of the McConnell Insurrectionist Caucus. I think a lot of people haven't really paid as much attention to the joint statement of Senator Cruz, Johnson, Langford, Daines, Kennedy, Blackburn, Braun, and Senator-elect Loomis, Marshall, Haggerty, and Tuberville, who had a letter of declaration about why they were going to impose the Electoral College count. And for myself who studies Southern politics and the Southern Manifesto, and even the Conservative Manifesto of 1937, this document has to be seen in this as exactly a manifesto, that it cannot be dismissed as the extremist caucus. And it has to be looked as a roadmap for what these senators will do to overthrow another election, and likely in 2024. I have to add also, Senator Scott did not sign the letter. Scott of Florida did not sign it, but stood with them. And so researching to see which other senators stood with them, but did not sign the letter as well. But there are a lot of unanswered questions about this. Were there any Senate Republicans in the caucus who were involved in the efforts to substitute fake electoral certificates of the 6 states that Trump lost? And I say that because we barely know what the full plan was for when those senators stood up and said that they were going to oppose the Electoral College. Were any of them connected with those efforts? And if so, will McConnell allow them to stay in the caucus if they're charged and proven guilty of the court of law? And what I ask is that, as Dr. Samuels pointed out, that we really need to reconsider this Hayes-Tilden compromise and how it impacts the elections in 2020 and 2024. And when I post my presentation in the chat, I'll have a link I encourage everyone who's interested to listen to McConnell's speech. It's hard because he basically, his delivery is not easy. But if you listen to his speech And if you read the text of his speech, he says, yes, Trump was guilty. Yes, violence occurred, but basically that's not my problem. I found a loophole in the Constitution to say that we cannot punish a sitting president. Now we know that he delayed the impeachment trial until Trump was out of office, but very few journalists say that. And that there's a reason why Trump was impeached in February instead of before January 20th. And we need scholars to examine the senators who stood for this insurrection, because will they be prosecuted for their crimes? And these crimes are not just crimes. These are crimes that led to violence, and these are crimes that can lead to further violence. How can we not expect for cities to be besieged by pro-Trump insurrectionists if courts do not go their way the next time around? So what I really want us to realize is that this is a caucus that there are no members that fight for democracy anymore. We saw Mitt Romney be saved by a Capitol Police officer and run away. And he did vote for the impeachment, but he's not standing up for voting rights. Lisa Murkowski ran as a write-in candidate in 2010 when she lost the primary to the Tea Party candidate. You would think that she would have an interest in making sure elections were fair, and she is not voting for election reform. And we also have Pat Toomey. He's on his way out of the Senate. So you would think he had nothing to lose by voting for election reform, but he is not voting for election reform, even though he's leaving the Senate. And so I think that what we have to do is provide, show how that what Dr. Samuels talked about, how Republicans in states are trying to nullify Democratic governors. We have to look at that. Even if, not to sound morbid, but if Mitch McConnell made the Kentucky legislature pass a law, so if he died while there was a Democrat in office, the Democrat would be forced to pick by law from a slate of 3 Republican candidates. So basically that makes the Democratic government a puppet of the Republican Party, that there is no political independence. And so what I really want is that for scholars, and I understand that a lot of people, you can't easily sit with Mitch McConnell or some of these other Republicans, because what they say is so offensive, so racist. But if Black people and other vulnerable populations don't start studying Mitch McConnell, he's going to go off basically unwritten. The quantitative analysis of the Senate that is usually done by scholars of the Senate will not depict McConnell's impact on the Senate. And we have to have qualitative research to really tell the story of what happened to the Obama and Biden agenda. And also to teach Senate literacy in a way that makes sure that people understand that the Senate is just as important as any other vote that you cast. And you need to know if you live in a state where your senator voted for insurrection and what that means. And consider, I'm still advocating for a special journal edition. If I can get a couple writers to do something and to submit articles related to the Senate and McConnell and the insurrection, so that we can have this on paper and maybe develop it more, because even the books that are being written about insurrection really aren't covering and saying what Mitch McConnell did and how he is really, he may not have been with Trump saying let's go, but by allowing criminals in his caucus and criminals outside, and to eliminate the three co-equal branches of government by saying that a president can have an insurrection, but the federal judiciary has to take care of it, is really damaging to the United States. And I really don't see what we have to protect us from mass violence and a tyrannical government if the election does not go well in 2024. Thank you.
Like our panelists, I haven't had to send anybody a threatening note to stop. So we are now going to hear our third presenter, Dr. Charisse Nelson.
Okay, can everyone see my screen?
Yes, we can see it.
Great. So I'm bringing up the end and talking about the international framework that allows for things that my other panelists have spoken of. And so the title of my presentation is Westphalian Sovereignty, the Denial of Black Citizenship, and the Generational Fight for Voting Rights. So if we start out this presentation, we have to understand what Westphalian sovereignty is, that allows for this perpetual need to then fight for voting rights, especially by Blacks. And it's a principle of international law that each state has exclusive sovereignty over its territory. This should sound familiar to many with the idea of states' rights, that we'll have different laws in the state of Mississippi that is functioning in many ways under the English system versus in Louisiana that is functioning under the French system of the Napoleonic Code, and has parishes versus counties, and the way that the democracy works there is different due to these boundaries. That these such boundaries are the foundation of the modern international sovereign system, and is what many people are arguing about why we need to maintain the borders in Ukraine in their fight for democracy. And it's the idea that every state, no matter how large or small, has equal rights to their sovereignty. So that is that power is then tied, that power is gained through territory, which then authorizes authority. Here's a quote that I use every time I talk about Westphalian sovereignty and why it makes a difference. The Westphalian order renders a powerful influence even if it is honored in the breach. The basic idea is that of a one system of territorialized organized states operating in an anarchic environment. These states are constitutionally independent, sovereign, and have exclusive authority to rule within their borders. They relate to the population within their borders as citizens; those belong to the state, and other states as legal equals. And the reason this is important, I think, for the modern context of voting rights is the idea that Alabamians belong to Alabama, and that then their voting rights can then be cast aside or annulled because they are Alabamians first and then belong to the United States second, and so forth and so on for other states, Georgia, Louisiana, all of those in the former Confederacy. So the social contract, we often talk about then political philosophy that then assigns or allows for such sovereignty. And we know that the social contract is the idea that we are relinquishing natural rights so that then the state can protect us. And the biggest question here then becomes is, who is the state designed to protect? Is it designed to then protect minorities that at the very outset of the use of the social contract were seen as property? I forward in the paper that I've written what Charles Mills talks about, and the idea that there is no such thing as a social contract for Blacks, but instead there's a racial contract where white supremacy is the global political system comprised of formal and informal rules that dictate social norms and hierarchy, and the benefits and burdens and the rights of these duties. And this racial contract is then is also superimposed upon pigmentocracy, right, which is a structural system of power which categorizes treatment based upon skin tone or skin type. And this plays a huge role in then voting rights as far as who then is allowed to speak up or seen as then the authority for speaking for rights of minority peoples in sovereign territories. In the racial contract, many of you know that Mills draws a link between whiteness and social belonging, right? And so the idea that Blacks do not belong then to the state, that they are not then citizens or not then attached to those legal rights because they are not seen as white, and that has everything to do with the fact that the original argument over Westphalian sovereignty was on the continent of Europe, which was an argument between Protestantism and Catholicism, and that Africans who, especially Western Africans, were not exposed to this Christianity, and not being exposed to this Christianity then makes them amoral and then not responsive then to a contract. So we see this, that we see the tenets of Westphalian sovereignty tied inside of the Declaration of Independence, because the Declaration of Independence was necessary then for the United States to then be seen in the international community as then being in concert with international law and order for how then grievances were then brought at the time. So the Declaration of Independence was necessary for then the rest of the world to recognize that the 13 colonies were leaving the authority and the sovereignty of Britain, and how they were to do that is denoted in that declaration. In that declaration, there's also then the indirect mention of the social contract through the common cause, and the idea that then such common cause was then not extended then originally to Blacks. So this is then reflected in our United States Constitution. Here I've listed Article 1, Section 2, Clause 3, which talks about the 3/5, often known as the 3/5 clause, and then the Fugitive Slave Clause. And so these things are important, and I highlight them here to get people to understand, or to highlight the fact that inside of the founding documents, that Blacks were not then seen as being accessible to that social contract. And so the idea of being able to have natural rights and then the progression then of political rights is then is at the foundation removed then from Black folks, which then establishes this perpetual need to then be fighting for rights that were denied to them at the beginning and the formation of the country. And then the Dred Scott case in 1857 then leaves no more doubt about Black citizenship, and I chose this this quote because I think it's very important to understand the nuance here about sovereignty, the sovereignty of the state versus the sovereignty of the national and what we know as the federal government. They, slaves and their descendants, are not included and are not intended to be included under the word citizen in the Constitution, and can therefore claim none of the rights and privileges which that instrument provides for and secures to citizens of the United States. They, the Blacks, had no rights which the white man was bound to respect. And this last part of the quote is what to me is so powerful, right? They, meaning Blacks, had no rights which the white man was bound to respect. And if we reflect on Stephanie's presentation, we will see that Mitch McConnell and many of those who participated in the insurrection believe this wholeheartedly, right? That white men do not have to listen to minority voices, especially those of Blacks in this country who were able to assuredly play a role in Joe Biden's victory of becoming president of the United States, and played the most direct role in flipping Georgia to be a blue state, electing the first Black man to the Senate. And the Reverend Raphael Warnock, and then the first Jew, and John Ossoff. So the collapse of dual sovereignty, if we quickly look at these dates, many of us are familiar with these dates, and so I won't go into an extensive understanding of them, but I want to highlight that there is a legal precedent for then the collapse of this dual sovereignty, the sovereignty that is created at the state level and at the national level, that then prohibits Blacks at the state level to then actualize their citizenship at the national level. And which is what, and there's always been a need for this. This is the reason I have this extensive list, is that there has always been a need for the national government, for the federal government, to then ensure that full citizenship in the way of voting rights is extended to Black people because of the history of exclusion inside of the states. I think this is the end of my presentation. I want to make sure, yes, that I'll leave it here, that access to full American citizenship is intrinsically linked to one's ability to vote, because the people are sovereign in a democracy. The way to exert such sovereignty is through then that vote. Historically, Americans have struggled with the idea that non-white males are worthy of such sovereign privilege, that racial superiority demands that such a sovereign priority is reserved for the worthy, and that white men deem who is worthy. It is this historical struggle that we find ourselves imbued, where the country is asking the question, what is democracy really, and how can we electorally participate? And that's where I want to leave. Let me back up, because I think that is definitely where I want to leave the presentation, with these questions, right? And I like to call it the democratic choice difference equation, right? That if you, to then be a citizen of these United States, you have to then first be seen to be moral, and that then allows you to be seen worthy. Then if you are then seen as worthy, then you're able to belong. And belonging is inextricably linked to your citizenship, and that citizenship has the power to control the authority inside of the territory. And so to be a citizen inside a democracy provides the power and the authority to choose, and that is ultimately what those inside of government are trying to strip away from us, the ability to choose, because they do not deem us as worthy of such choice. Thank you so much.
Well, I want to thank our three presenters and invite our audience to put your questions in the chat so that we can have some dialogue. But while you are putting your questions in the chat, I would like to just throw out a question to our presenters, that we have an important election coming up in November, and we have a lot of changes in the laws at the state level. We have no change in ensuring voting rights at the national level, both so far from the Supreme Court, from the Senate. So what do you see happening in November and right in the aftermath of the elections of November 2022? Anybody?
If I can go first, I unfortunately think that we're going to see national violence, nationwide violence. Looking at the truck rally that is coming around, that went around to the DC area, and seeing that we had senators, Ted Cruz being one, that were meeting with them, walking with them, giving them legitimacy, signals to them that that what they're doing is okay, and that they have every right to protect the ballot in their states. I'm particularly concerned about Texas because the senator candidate, he's the gubernatorial race. He was so close. His name slips my mind. He was so close last time. I think he can get even closer, if not win. But
Beto
O'Rourke. But what I see coming out of Texas with Cruz encouraging the incitement and violence makes me worry that Texas will probably be the place with possibly the worst violence that we see in the country.
To speak to that, to speak to that directly, Dr. Williams, I'm here in Georgia, and my husband got an opportunity to interview the lieutenant governor as we were walking to the unveiling of Andrew Young's statue here in Atlanta, and got to talk. I mean, the lieutenant governor for the state of Georgia was out there and was, walking in this peace walk, and they had a conversation. And to your exact point of what you're saying, he made it very clear, Lieutenant Duncan here in the state of Georgia, made it very clear that it was his responsibility to denounce violence for upcoming elections. And that as a presider here in the state of Georgia over their Senate, that without a vote, that he had to ensure that violence was not incited because he was not a part of the Republican Party that participated in what Dr. Samuels has called the big lie. And it was very peculiar to me because I don't think that he's actually in step with Brian Kemp, but it also made it very clear to me why here in Georgia there's much tension and consternation, because there's many of them inside of the Republican Party who do not believe in the big lie, who do not want their party to become this fringe party that resorts to violence when they don't win, right? So he made a declaration, right, and was very upfront about the fact that it is his role and his job in the state of Georgia in these midterms to ensure that there is not a stoking of violence from the seat of government in the state.
Dr. Samuel?
Just real quickly, there's a lot to be concerned about. Just in general, without all this, okay, usually the midterm elections are bad for the party in power. And then when you throw in this toxic stew of polarization and election subversion, when we have, there are real and violence. There are real concerns in my mind that about whether or not the Republicans will gain one or both houses of Congress back by hook and by crook. Now it is possible. It is possible that sometimes there have been a few times recently that when Republicans have been our own best friend. They have nominated candidates that have been so extreme. I think about who was the guy who talked about a legitimate rape. Oh
yeah, in Missouri.
Yeah. So I mean, they've been Republicans have been so extreme. By embracing the RNC, by embracing the insurrection, as legitimate discourse. So it is possible that the Republicans could actually get in their own way, but it's a bad place to be in when you have to depend on the other side being stupid.
But I also have to think there's a naivety of voters, particularly white voters, about how fast political violence is, because it's always Black people in race riots. It's never, and even the fact that Fox News was able to say that these were just protesters, I mean, it was beyond whitewashing. It was really, when you look at what Putin's doing, telling the Russians, that they're going against, they're denazifying the Ukrainian government. Well, I don't see a difference between that and what Fox News and the right-wing media is saying about that these people are just expressing their First Amendment rights. I mean, they are not even saying that police got killed. I mean, supposedly the pro-police party, they're not saying that all the people who are being convicted. I mean, we think maybe not fast enough and maybe not the top ones yet, but there are thousands of people who have criminal records now from participating in the insurrection. And that whitewashing of history for their convenience makes it so dangerous for people who maybe they might not even be Fox News viewers, but people who are not in tune with current events, but are hearing this and being taught this, that when it comes to their doorstep, and it will, that they won't be prepared to confront it, because no one can escape this. Mm-hmm.
Yeah, Dr. Williams, I think you bring up a very good point, though, about these convictions. Let's be clear that these convictions would not be possible without the special committee, right? And so let's highlight the role that the Congressional Black Caucus is playing, because Benny Thompson, who is the chairman, said, no, we're going to have an inquiry committee. Without said inquiry committee, right, it's very difficult then to have substantiating evidence to then charge these people. So I think one of the biggest reasons that they're able to your point, as far as whitewash this, is because, going back to pigmentocracy, if the person that's leading the inquiry into said incident is Black, well, then I can dismiss the entire thing as fraudulent, amoral, or however I want to frame it, if that makes sense. I think that plays a huge role to why the whitewashing is being allowed. Republicans are going to allow anything to begin with to maintain power. But to add to your point, if there was, to your very point, if there was a Mitch McConnell, or if there was someone that was white, if that makes any sense, leading the charge on this insurrection inquiry, I believe that we would see different framing from the news media.
Well, we have a question in the chat from Dr. Shaw. And his question is, does history, and particularly Black political history, suggest there's a way out of the dilemmas that you pose, even if we are clearly talking about a long game?
I'd like to take that on. I think that one example I would point to would be the formation of the NAACP Legal Defense Fund. When we think about the Brown decision, it's easy to forget that the campaign to attack Plessy really started in the 1930s. And that was a very inhospitable time to do something like that. It was in the middle of the Depression. It was in the middle of still one of the most reactionary Supreme Courts in the history of this country. So the point is that they didn't wait until they had a Earl Warren majority. They started building over time. It took a long time to build the precedents before they could take on Plessy directly. And I think that that's the kind of long game that we have to play, because I'm saying that's what conservatives do. A lot of what's happening now is based upon stuff that they put in place in the 1960s and 1970s. And they have, and so we're gonna need people who have the ability to play the long game. We also got to deal with the short game, and we're forever reacting to what's happening right now, and we need people doing that. But we also need people who are actually working on the long game as well. We got to do both. And I think that sometimes we're forever reacting, but we need to recognize that even when we win victories, they're coming back.
Yeah, and I think the long game, Dr. Shaw, is what we've seen with Black mayors, and trends where we've seen pushes for Black mayors and how getting executive leadership at the city level then plays a role. So I think the long game that we need to be looking at really here is how do we then change state legislatures? I think that is really I really feel like that is the long game strategy that we have to be looking at, because that is what was done to us in 2010. Although Obama took a shellacking inside of the House, there was also a major shift in how state legislatures dealt with, especially the part-time legislatures, right? Which are normally in the southern states. What we need to really think about is how do we create a strategy amongst state legislators where we bring up one or two issues that we champion, and then getting voting blocks where we can block the Republicans from being successful at getting anything through these state legislatures. Because we have to find a way to amass power now, not by passing legislation, but being able to be strong enough to block said legislation, whatever it is. We need to start taking on the same stance that Mitch McConnell has taken on at the national level. We need to take that stance at the state level, but the way to do that is by building up a majority or at least a split inside of these state houses to be able to truly affect the direct lives of Blacks who are reverse migrating back to southern states. Because that's the huge thing, is that if we are able to corner these state legislatures, that we will then see reverberations inside of the Electoral College.
And I have to say, go off of what Dr. Nelson said, for I'm currently living in Florida, hopefully retiring in New Jersey, but what, as a Florida resident, the ballots are becoming increasingly more complicated every single election. The fact that as a political scientist with a PhD that I need to take my ballot, check it against a couple nonprofits, and then take my ballot to vote tells me we're having a problem. So I completely agree that the long game is in the state legislatures, and we have to start teaching people how to read the ballots on the legislature, because it is, to me, it's back to the days of the poll tax, because they are that complicated. And the fact that even that 76% of Floridians voted to allow former felons to regain their voting rights. The state legislature decided that we're going to veto it. So that a super majority, white, Black, Republican, Democrat, Independent, said, let these people vote. Ron DeSantis' team said, no, we're not. Because if they voted, Ron DeSantis would not be governor for sure.
Okay,
And
well,
Rick Scott would not be Senate.
I'm going to have to jump in here because
Okay.
time is running out, but I want to say something before we close. At the same time I'm attending NCOBPS, I'm also attending the Black Women's Roundtable Summit. And some of the same issues are being discussed here. Quite a few people from the administration have come over to speak to the women's groups, but also we have a new poll out, the Essence poll. And one of the things that's concerning everybody, and also the NAACP in Georgia, they've commissioned a poll. They're looking at why people are not voting. Because one of the things that they're feeling like Black people are giving up. They're not there for the long game like we need to have them. And so they're not seeing enough coming out of the Biden administration right away to make them feel like we should get invested again. And so this is going to be a serious problem in this next election, is how do we motivate people to go and stand in line knowing that you may not have any food and somebody could get arrested if they try to give you some food. All these barriers they have put up in our places to keep us from voting in the next election. How are we going to be able to get anybody other than the diehards to go out and stand up and vote? And how do we get them to think that they should vote in Congress vote for the Congress members when everybody's predicting we're going to lose the Congress, we're going to lose the Congress. And so they're drilling that into our heads that we've already lost. So don't even try to go out and vote. And so it's going to be very interesting what happens in 2022. And I see we're out of time and I don't want to get cut off, but I want to thank our excellent panelists for starting the discussion here. And I know we will keep it going. Too bad we're not in person because we'd be going to the bar now maybe and continue this discussion. But thank you.
Yes,
And
we
there's
would.
another,
Atlanta next year.
yeah. And there's another Jewel Prestige panel that's starting in the next cycle. So we invite you to participate in that also and continue to attend all of the panels that are happening. Somebody's trying to say something? Okay,
I
well,
just wanted to,
yeah.
I just wanted to say thank you guys for this panel. This group of scholars are always on point when we think about the state of scholarship and we try to break up these nuances about explaining how racist these people are. I think that this group, we call a spade because we can go through the theoretical frameworks, we can talk about group interest and all that. It boils down to this deep-seated resentment that Blacks have been painted as civil enemies of civil society since the inception. And what we see happening now is a boiling over and a spilling over of these sentiments into democratic institutions. And I share the same concern each of you share, that we are in uncharted territory. And it seems as if people aren't getting the message. Like what happened with January 6th, in addition to these restrictions on voting rights, we're on the brink of a civil conflict in this country. And I think that people aren't taking that seriously because we think that it's not gonna happen here. So I always enjoy the roundtable with this group every year. And so keep up the great work and keep the great tradition that Southern University has always done with Black political science by being true to Black liberation. Thank you all so much.
America
Scott,
is not
give me a call,
exceptional.
too.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
See you at the next panel. Okay.
All right,
bye.
thank
Bye.
you.
Bye.